That a conservative majority on the United States Supreme Court is ready to overturn Roe v. Wade and uproot decades of precedent affirming a woman's right to an abortion.
That's Chuck Schumer speaking about a leaked draft of a court opinion originally obtained and reported by Politico. The draft, which was circulated among justices in February, suggests that the court is poised to overturn the decades-old decision on the right to abortion. Shortly after the leak, the Supreme Court released a statement confirming the document's authenticity, but added that it did not represent a decision by the court.
What we're seeing is a snapshot, and it could change, even though it's written in this very polished way that makes it look like a final opinion.
Writing an important legal opinion, which is going to have an effect on the whole country, takes a bit of time.
The leaked draft represents one step in a process that can involve months of deliberation. Here's a look at how the Supreme Court makes decisions on cases and how their rulings affect lawmaking in Congress. Once the Supreme Court accepts a case, justices review briefs and hear oral arguments from both sides. In December, the court heard oral arguments for Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, a case that considers a state law in Mississippi seeking to ban abortion after 15 weeks. As part of the case, the court is considering whether Roe versus Wade should be overruled. Within days of an oral argument, the justices hold a private meeting, known as the conference, where they explain their views on a case and take a straw vote, or preliminary vote, on the ruling. The senior justice in the majority decides who writes the court's opinion, which is a written explanation of what they decided and the reasoning behind it. In this case, Justice Samuel Alito was assigned to write the draft.
A majority opinion of the Supreme Court decides what the law is in the United States. It's the last word when it comes to interpreting the United States Constitution.
The majority opinion is the only one that holds legal weight, but justices can write individual opinions explaining their stance. Those who agree but have additional ideas can write a concurring opinion, and those who disagree can draft a dissenting opinion. Those opinions circulate through the court, and justices decide whether or not to sign on to them. This process can last several weeks or months. During this time, they give feedback on the wording of the opinion, and the document can be edited.
From people in the majority, they're going to be saying what they like, what they don't like, what they want to see emphasized, what they think is going too far, that kind of thing. And they'll send notes or corrections. They'll make suggestions. Sometimes during that process, a justice can lose a majority.
While it doesn't happen often, justices have changed their minds while the opinion was being drafted. In 2012, Chief Justice John Roberts initially voted to strike down the Affordable Care Act, but ultimately came to see the law as constitutional. That's what changed the outcome to a 5-4 vote upholding the statute.
Things can change up until the last minute, until the court officially, formally, publicly releases an opinion. It has not made a decision.
At least 5 out of 9 justices need to sign on to approve the opinion. The draft is kept completely private until this point. Then it is released to the public and treated as constitutional law, which federal and state legislatures are bound to follow.
Sometimes when the Supreme Court makes a decision, there is a reaction, and Congress takes some steps to respond to what the court has done.
If the draft opinion in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization holds, it will be the rare instance where the court rescinds a right it previously has recognized.
What this decision is purporting to do is to take away a prior Supreme Court decision recognizing a constitutional right, and that constitutional right restricted what legislatures could do, be it state legislatures or Congress.
If the majority of justices sign on to the opinion, abortion restrictions that have previously been unenforceable under Roe, like those in Florida, Texas, and Michigan, could start being enforced. Some states could act to preserve the right to reproductive choice. Lawmakers in New York and California said that they would push to amend their state constitutions to cement existing laws that protect abortion rights. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has stated Democrats' intention to codify Roe vs. Wade at the federal level, but any bill faces major hurdles in a divided Congress.
It is my intention for the Senate to hold a vote on legislation to codify the right to an abortion in law.
If the Supreme Court were to overrule Roe versus Wade, that's a kind of unusual situation because, it's very hard to think of a time that the court recognized an individual right and then took it away. And then people who still wanted that right had to enact it legislatively.
The court has until the end of June to make a final decision, and experts expect that abortion will be one of the final rulings before the court takes a break.
Roe had been the lead story of the night before on CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. The voluble anchor read a short intro calling it a landmark ruling and added that the abortion laws of 46 states had been rendered unconstitutional.
Peter Kalischer in Paris, Tom Fenton in Paris, Robert Shackney in Des Moines. And tonight, a CBS Evening News special report, The Energy Crisis.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional. More on this story from George Herman.
In 2 related cases and 8 separate opinions, the 9 justices made abortion largely a private matter and ordered the states to make no laws forbidding it, except possibly during the final months. The court split 7-2, with Justices Byron White and William Rehnquist dissenting. In effect, the court makes abortion subject only to the decision of the pregnant woman's doctor. It ruled that states may make no laws restricting a doctor's right to decide his patient needs an abortion and to carry out that abortion during the first 3 months of a pregnancy. After that comparatively safe 3-month period, abortions may be regulated, but not prohibited by state law and for the benefit of the mother's health alone. Abortion is somewhat more dangerous at this stage, and states may insist, for example, that they be performed in regulated hospitals. Only in the final stages of pregnancy may states intervene and say no to abortion. The court's decision, written by Justice Blackmun, thus sets limits on the right to abortion on demand. One limit is the time when doctors believe the fetus may be able to survive outside the mother's womb. At that point, usually in the 7th month of pregnancy, the state may take legal action to protect the unborn child, even forbidding abortion except to protect the mother. The newly liberalized abortion law brought immediate reaction.
I think that to raise the dignity of woman and give her freedom of choice in this area is an extraordinary event. And I think that January 22nd, 1973 would be an historic day.
In this instance, the Supreme Court has withdrawn protection for the human rights of unborn children, and it is teaching people that abortion is a rather innocuous procedure provided that there are proper legal safeguards. I think that the judgment of the court will do a great deal to tear down the respect previously accorded human life in our culture.
One of today's plaintiffs was an anonymous former mental patient identified only as Mary Doe, 22 years old. CBS News correspondent Fred Graham talked with her recently.
Now, the first 2 children you'd had they been taken away from you?
Yes, because I couldn't take care of them by myself, and I couldn't with my husband.
And now I believe you had one more, and it was also put out for adoption, wasn't it?
Yes, I put it out because of my husband.
Now, after you were unable to get the abortion for the 4th pregnancy, what happened?
Well, I had to go on and have the baby and have it adopted out.
New York State, among others, already have liberalized abortions. Now the rest of the country must follow suit. The White House offered no comment, but President Nixon has always strongly opposed liberalized abortion. Other opponents are now talking of a constitutional amendment to reverse today's ruling. Until then, if the experience of New York State is any guide, America will eventually have 1 abortion for every 2 births. George Herman, CBS News, Washington.
There was, of course, other reaction. Cardinal Cook, the Catholic Archbishop of New York, called the decision a shocking action and Cardinal Kroll of Philadelphia termed it an unspeakable tragedy. The High Court also agreed today to resolve another major constitutional question, government aid to parochial and private schools.
Cronkite tossed the reporter George Herman, who summed up the ruling as the camera panned over an artist's drawing of the 9 justices. Herman said the White House had declined to comment, but that Nixon had always been opposed to legalize abortion. The report was less than 3.5 minutes. Nixon had brought up the decision in a chat with aides that evening, captured on an automatic taping system, but without much heat. On the tape, he can be heard to say, quote, "There are times when abortions are necessary. I know that, between a black and a white," unquote.
The National Archives released new tapes today of President Richard Nixon. They capture the time back in 1973 when the Supreme Court announced its landmark abortion decision, Roe vs. Wade. At the time, President Nixon made no public comment. In private, though, he had a number of things to say, and they were captured on that now notorious secret recording device in the Oval Office. NPR Legal Affairs correspondent Nina Totenberg reports.
The comments are startling, and as in many of the previously released tape recordings, they reveal more about the president than the issue. Mr. Nixon is meeting with a variety of aides, including Henry Kissinger and Charles Colson, and the crosstalk often makes the conversation difficult to decipher. Still, a listener can discern some comments from the president disapproving of the decision because he thinks it will lead to promiscuity and family ruptures. At one point, the president indicates he thinks that abortion is justified in cases of interracial mating or rape. "I know there are times when abortions are necessary," he tells an aide. "I know that, when you have a black and a white, or a rape. I just say that matter-of-factly," he adds. "You know what I mean? There are times." Abortions encourage permissiveness, he says. A girl gets knocked up, she doesn't have to worry about the pill anymore. She goes down to the doctor, wants to get an abortion for $5 or whatever. Listening to the tape, it's hard to remember now that Roe versus Wade was not an instantaneous cause célèbre or even the basis for a political movement. The decision was not the top story in the nation's leading newspapers that day. The Washington Post and New York Times led with banner headlines about the death of President Lyndon Johnson, who'd left office 4 years earlier. Joseph Kraft, one of the nation's leading columnists, wrote that a conservative court had reached a conservative conclusion in a battle between individual rights and state power, and almost all of the immediate criticism of the decision came from the Catholic Church. A decade earlier, the Supreme Court had invalidated a Connecticut law that made it a crime.
In the last day, I think maybe even it was today, that people need to get used to accepting outcomes. Mm-hmm. And that's a good statement as far as it goes if you're detached from history or you're speaking in a vacuum. But when you have an outcome that people think is tainted in some way because there was cheating in some way or bad faith in some way, or the methodology or the arguments made in favor of the outcome are things that are unusual and perhaps even unprecedented in constitutional history, then people have a harder time dealing with the outcome. And maybe you'll put the quote up in a minute. It's also especially ironic coming from Clarence Thomas when the outcome in the country, the political outcome in the country that has been most resisted with violence and by other means has been the election of 2020, which has raised a lot of controversy because Clarence Thomas's wife was in communication with people with respect to January 6th and has been a proponent of the big lie. So I think you're correct to say, as others have been saying, that there's going to be a reduction in the trust and faith and respect people have for the court. It's been on the slide for a while now. I think approval of the Supreme Court some years ago was about 60%. Now it's 40% and below. And it's going to get worse because the other thing about outcomes, since Clarence Thomas is talking about it, is if you engage in an outcome that lays the foundation and opens the door for other bad outcomes, as you and Emily Bazelon were discussing a few minutes ago, that's also going to make people not want to abide by this particular outcome, the overruling of Roe v. Wade. The basis of the reasoning in that opinion opens the door, and I know some people are having a debate about this intellectually and academically, but the door is opened, if that opinion stands, to the withdrawal and taking away of other rights. So it's an easy thing to say in a speech, people should abide by outcomes, but it's not how it works in practice, particularly when it's gone this way.
Let's talk about what Clarence Thomas and exactly where he is. He was speaking at a judicial conference. It was in Atlanta, Preet, and he's saying that government institutions should be, quote, shouldn't be, quote, bullied into delivering what some see as a preferred outcome, and added that you cannot have a free society without stable institutions. So, I mean, is the Supreme Court being bullied? That's quite an accusation on his part.
I believe that in the Constitution, speaking of the Supreme Court in the Constitution, there is an amendment, it's the first one, and people are allowed to express dismay and disagreement with Supreme Court decisions. That's how it works. You know, the ironic thing about, the other ironic thing, there's many ironies about it, but one of the ironic things about the Thomas statement about accepting outcomes and not being bullied is, think of what the conservative reaction, the anti-abortion reaction has been to Roe for 49 years. Were they accepting? Were they tolerant of it? Were they not resorting to bullying of the court?
Right.
And figuring out ways through the Federalist Society and by cheating Merrick Garland out of a seat on the Supreme Court and by rushing Amy Coney Barrett to a seat on the court when the election was just days away? Were they accepting of the outcome in Roe v. Wade? They were not. So it's the height of ironies bordering on just ridiculousness for that kind of statement to be made.
And unlike others, Trump continued to insinuate to the issue in the fall campaign, describing the abortion procedures in lurid terms, saying women who had abortions, quote, should face some sort of punishment, end quote. While most Americans might have found Trump's language repugnant, it caught attention and signposted once again Trump's promise regarding Roe and the courts.
Well, look, I mean, as you know, I'm pro-life, right? I think you know that. With exceptions, with the 3 exceptions. But pretty much that's my stance. Is that okay? You understand?
What should the law be on abortion?
Well, I have been pro-life.
I know. What should the law? I know your principle. That's a good value, but what should be the law?
They've set the law, and frankly, the judges, and I mean, you're going to have a very big election coming up for that reason, because you have judges where it's a real tipping point. And with the loss of Scalia, who was, you know, a very strong conservative, this presidential election is going to be very important, because when you say what's the law, nobody knows what the law is going to be. It depends on who gets elected, because somebody's going to appoint conservative judges and somebody's going to appoint liberal judges depending on who wins.
I've never understood the pro-life position.
Well,
I never understood it, because I understand principle. It's human life as people see it. But what crime is it?
Well, it's human life.
No, should the woman be punished for having an abortion?
Look.
This is not something you can dodge. If you say abortion is a crime or abortion is murder, you have to deal with it under the law. Should abortion be punished?
Well, people in certain parts of the Republican Party and conservative Republicans would say yes, they should be punished.
How about you?
I would say that it's a very serious problem, and it's a problem that we have to decide on. It's very hard.
But you're for banning it.
Are you going to say, well, wait, are you going to say put them in jail? Is that
well,
the
no, what I'm
punishment
asking
that you're talking about?
Because you say you want to ban it. What's that mean?
I am pro-life, yes.
What is ban? How do you ban abortion? How do you actually do it?
Well, you know, you'll go back to a position like they had, where people will perhaps go to illegal places.
Yeah.
But you have to ban it.
You ban it and they go to somebody who flunked out of medical school.
Are you Catholic?
Yes, I think
And how do you feel about the Catholic Church's position?
I accept the teaching authority of my church on moral issues.
But do you know their position on abortion?
Yes, I do.
And do you concur with that position?
I concur with their moral position, but legally I get to the question. Here's my problem with it.
No, but let me ask you, but what do you say about
It's not funny.
Your church? Yeah, it's really not a funny thing. What do you say about your church? They're very, very strong.
They're allowed to, but the churches make their moral judgments, but you running for president of the United States will be chief executive of the United States. Do you believe believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
10 cents, 10 years,
I don't know. That I don't know.
Why not?
I don't know.
You take positions and everything else.
I do take positions and everything else. It's a very complicated position.
But you say bluntly you're pro-life, meaning you want to ban it.
But the Catholic Church is pro-life.
No, let's not talk about my religion.
But no, I am talking about your religion. Your religion, I mean, you say you're a very good Catholic.
I didn't say very good. I said I'm a Catholic. And secondly, I'm asking, you're running for president. I'm not. I'm asking you, what should a woman face if she chooses to have an abortion?
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play that game.
You said you're pro-life.
I am pro-life.
That means banning abortion. abortion.
And so is the Catholic Church pro-life.
But they don't control this isn't Spain. We don't control the church doesn't control the government.
What is the punishment under the Catholic Church? What is the punishment?
Let me give you something from the New Testament. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Don't ask me about my religion.
No,
I'm asking you. You want to be president of the United States. You tell me what the law should be. Just tell me what the law should be. You say you're pro-life.
I am pro-life.
What's that mean?
With exceptions. I am pro-life. I have not determined what the punishment would be.
Why not?
Because I haven't determined it.
When you decide to be pro-life, you should have thought of it. Because
no, you could ask anybody that's
here's the
pro-life.
problem. Here's my problem with this. If you don't have a punishment for abortion, I don't believe in it, of course, people are going to find a way to have an abortion.
You don't believe in what? You don't believe in what?
I don't believe in punishing anybody for having an abortion.
Okay, fine. Okay,
of course not. And I think it's a woman's choice.
So you're against the teachings of your church?
I believe I have a view and a moral view, but I believe we live in a free country, and I don't want to live in a country so fascistic that it can stop a person from making that decision.
But then that
would be so invasive.
But I've heard
so determinative a society that I wouldn't be one we're familiar with. And Donald Trump, you wouldn't be familiar with a society like that.
But I've heard you speaking so highly about your religion and your church.
Yeah.
Your church is very, very strongly, as you know, pro-life.
I know.
What do you say to your church?
I say, I accept your moral authority. In the United States, the people make the decisions, the courts rule on what's in the Constitution, and we live by that. That's what I say.
Yeah, but you don't live by it because you don't accept it. You can't accept it. You can't accept it. You can't accept it.
Can we go back to matters of the law and running for president? Because matters of the law, what I'm talking about, and this is the difficult situation you placed yourself in. By saying you're pro-life, you mean you want to ban abortion. How do you ban abortion without some kind of sanction? Then you get into that very tricky question of a sanction. A fine on human life, which you call murder.
It'll have to be determined.
A fine, imprisonment for a young woman who finds herself pregnant.
It will have to be determined.
What about the guy that gets her pregnant? Is he responsible under the law for these abortions? Or is he not responsible for an abortion decision?
It hasn't, different feelings, different people.
Yeah.
I would say no.
Well, there's